The city had always breathed with noise, steel grinding against steel, market stalls alive with the shouts of vendors, children weaving through alleys with laughter in their lungs. In those days, people believed the Imperium's light was eternal. They prayed to the Emperor with routine reverence, not desperation, and went about their days with the quiet assumption that tomorrow would be the same as today. But tomorrow never came. It began with whispers, carried down the streets like sickness. People claimed the sky was wrong, that the stars looked sharper, closer, that sometimes when you tilted your head just right, they seemed to move. The priest said it was blasphemy. The workers said it was exhaustion. But the old ones, the ones who remembered other times of horror, said nothing at all. The train still ran on time. That was what mattered. Steel lifelines carving through the underhive, hauling ore and fuel, and the tired bodies of men and women back to their families. They were the veins of the city, always pumping, always steady, until one day they weren't. In the week before the end, trains arrived late, or not at all. Entire lines went dark. Workers were left stranded, milling at stations where the glow globes flickered overhead. The overseers barked, the priests scolded, but no explanations came. Somewhere far away in the upper hive, something was stirring, something that bled through steel and stone and into the marrow of men. And yet, the city lived on. People forced themselves to laugh, forced their hands to work, forced their voices to keep steady, because to do otherwise was to admit the truth, that the end had already begun. On the morning of the second moon, people woke to find the air colder than it should have been. Frost clung to the edges of windows despite the hissing pipes that bled steam into every hab block. Mothers pulled children closer, whispering prayers under their breath, though none of them could say why. By noon, the streets had grown quieter. The vendors still cried out, but their voices carried with an edge of strain, as though the words themselves cost too much to speak. The workers at the foundries swung their hammers with less strength, distracted by shadows that seemed too long, by sounds that rang strangely in the echoes of the tunnels. The priests, at first, denied anything unusual. The Emperor protects, they said, their voices brittle, and the Emperor provides. But their sermons grew shorter each day, their eyes darting to the sky through narrow windows. That night, the first train failed to return. It was the East Line hauler, packed with nearly 200 miners from the deep veins. Wives and husbands gathered at the station, stamping their feet against the cold, expecting delay. The overseer assured them it was only a signal disruption, a mechanical failure. Nothing unusual. Hours passed. No train came. The overseer disappeared into his office and did not return. The glow globes sputtered. The crowd grew restless, muttering prayers to the Emperor, their voices layering into a desperate chorus. A few men tried to force the station doors, to walk the track themselves, but the guards stopped them. The children cried themselves to sleep in their mother's arms. When morning came, the crowd had thinned, leaving only the strongest behind. Still, no train arrived. And when the second night fell, a sound echoed from the tunnel, a deep, metallic screech, like iron being torn apart from within. Those who heard it swore they would never forget. 3 days later, new posters appeared on the station walls. Printed hastily, with ink still smudged, they declared, "All civilians to report to station. Last evacuation train leaves on 5th night. No exceptions." The words were signed not by the governor nor by the overseers, but by a name few recognized. Some faceless sigil of the administratum, printed in ink that seemed to bleed into the page. The people didn't question. They didn't have the strength to. Because by then the city itself had begun to rot. The water ran red, metallic, with the taste of rust. The air carried the stench of burning flesh, though no fires were seen. Livestock birthed stillborn calves, their bodies twisted in ways no creature should bear. And in the alleys, children whispered of a man with no face who followed them home. The day before the 5th night, families packed what they could carry: food, blankets, tokens of faith. The rich fled first, securing their places aboard the train through coin and blood. The poor gathered in the streets, waiting for orders, clinging to the promise that there was still a way out. No one spoke of the miners or the East Line hauler that had vanished into the dark. No one wanted to believe what the silence already told them. The station was not built for so many. By the second night, more than 5,000 civilians pressed into its iron-boned belly. Hab-block workers, miners, priests in tattered robes, even the sick carried on stretchers by sons with hollow eyes. They came in waves, spilling across the cracked stone platforms until the station floor looked like a tide of flesh and fear. Everywhere there was noise, babies crying, vendors shouting scraps of food for outrageous prices, arguments breaking out and silenced just as quickly by the crack of a guard's shock maul. The air grew heavy, thick with sweat and desperation. The smell of too many bodies in too small a place clung to the walls like mold. At first, people tried to organize. The priests stood on benches, calling for calm, shouting prayers to the emperor, demanding obedience. But their words were swallowed by the noise. Few listened anymore. The workers trusted steel, not scripture. On the 3rd night, the crowd swelled to twice its size. Families spilled from the streets into the station, dragging carts and bundles, clutching children too young to understand why their mothers wept when they spoke of tomorrow. The platforms became a battlefield of elbows and curses. Men fought for space near the front, where the train would come. Women screamed when strangers shoved too close. Guards were stationed at the gates, rifles in hand, their armor dented and painted over so many times that the imperial Aquila was little more than a smear. One of them, a young man with eyes too tired for his age, kept his finger tight against the trigger, whispering the same prayer over and over. "Emperor, protect. Emperor, protect." He said it like a man drowning says the word air. The city outside had grown darker. No one wanted to stay in the streets when night fell. Shadows stretched too far. Voices whispered from corners where no mouths could be seen. In the alleys near the station, people vanished, their screams sharp and brief, cut off before anyone could run to help. So the people stayed. They clung to the station, huddled together, praying that when the fifth night came, the train would arrive to carry them away. But there were those who already doubted. Among the crowd, faces emerged that did not belong. Men with strange tattoos hidden under their collars. Women whose eyes lingered too long on the shadows, lips moving in prayers not meant for the Emperor. They whispered to each other in the corners, smiles curling on faces where no joy should be. They spoke of freedom. They spoke of salvation. But their salvation was not meant for humanity. And though no one yet knew, the enemy was already among them. On the fourth night, the station shook. It began as a low vibration, a deep hum that trembled through the steel rails beneath the people's feet. At first, many cheered. "The train!" they cried, lifting children onto their shoulders, pointing toward the tunnel mouth where the dark waited. "It's coming! The train is coming." But then the sound grew louder. The cheer faltered, dying on their lips. Mothers pulled children closer. Men gripped whatever weapons they carried, a rusted blade, a pipe, a broken tool. The tunnel breathed. That was the only word for it. A slow exhale of air, warm and fetid, carrying with it the stench of rot. The glow globes lining the walls flickered, their light bending as though pulled toward the dark. And then came the scream. It was not human. High-pitched, metallic, layered with echoes that made the skull ache. It clawed into the ears of every soul in that station and dragged nails across their hearts. Children cried, adults covered their heads. A priest collapsed to his knees, clutching his ears and shouting the Emperor's name until his voice broke. From the tunnel mouth, something moved. Not a train, not steel or machine. Shadows spilled forward, writhing as though alive, twisting into shapes that could not be named. For a moment, they seemed to retreat, pulled back into the dark, and the crowd gasped in relief. But the relief was a lie, because the shadows had not retreated. They had simply chosen. A sound like tearing cloth ripped through the air. From the farthest corner of the platform, a woman shrieked, her body lifted off the ground as though by invisible claws. She thrashed, arms flailing, mouth wide and wet with blood, as her chest split open in a spray of red. Panic exploded. People surged forward, pressing against one another in a stampede that crushed the weak and trampled the fallen. Children were torn from their mothers' arms, voices lost in the cacophony of terror. The guards opened fire into the tunnel, las bolts streaking red through the air. But for every shadow struck, another took its place. The air filled with the smell of ozone and blood. One of the priests tried to rally the crowd, lifting a tattered icon of the Emperor, shouting, "Stand firm. The Emperor is our shield." But the shadows answered with laughter, low and guttural, vibrating through the bones of all who heard it. The priest's body folded in half, and in that moment the truth spread through the station like wildfire. This was no evacuation. This was no rescue. The train was never coming to save them. The people of the city had already been abandoned, and something else had taken notice. The screams still echoed when the crowd realized the shadows had not followed them fully into the station. They clung to the edges, writhing along the walls like smoke that refused to fade, testing the air, testing the resolve of those still alive. People huddled together, clutching icons, muttering prayers, sobbing into sleeves. Mothers searched for missing children. Men searched for wives. Everyone was searching for someone they had already lost. For a fragile moment, the chaos stilled. The survivors breathed shallowly, afraid even the sound of their lungs might call the things closer. That was when the cultists revealed themselves. They had been among the crowd all along. Ordinary faces, familiar accents, hands calloused from honest labor. But as fear pressed down and faith wavered, they no longer needed their masks. It began with a song, soft at first, barely audible over the crackle of dying glow globes. A woman's voice, low and rhythmic, carrying a tune no imperial hymn had ever known. Heads turned. The guards shouted for silence. But the song only grew louder, stronger, carried by more voices, men, women, even children. Their words were not in High Gothic, nor in any dialect of the Imperium. They were older, hungrier. Words that tasted wrong in the mouth and felt sharp in the ears. One by one, the singers dropped their disguises. Sleeves rolled back to reveal tattoos etched in scar tissue, spirals of eyes, fanged mouths, twisting glyphs that pulsed as though alive. Robes were shed to reveal bodies painted in crimson and ash, prayers carved directly into flesh with trembling hands. The woman who had started the song lifted her arms, her eyes glowing faintly with unnatural light. Her mouth stretched into a grin too wide for her face. "The train is not your salvation," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally in the chamber. "It is your offering." Gas rippled through the crowd. Some shouted in anger, others in fear. A guard raised his rifle, his hands shaking. "Silence her," he barked. "In the Emperor's name, silence her." He fired. The shot struck her square in the chest. She staggered, but no blood spilled. Instead, her body twisted, bones cracking, flesh folding into itself like melted wax. When she straightened again, her face was gone. Only a smooth, blank surface remained, and when she spoke again, her voice came from everywhere at once. "We sang in the tunnels," she hissed. "We sang to the dark." And the dark answered. The cultists attacked. Knives flashed in the dim light, curved blades etched with blasphemous symbols. They struck with feral precision, tearing through guards before they could reload. Men screamed as hooks dug into their backs, dragging them down into the press of bodies. Women fell, clutching their children, blood spraying across the platform tiles. Panic returned like fire through dry tinder. The crowd scattered, surging toward the exits, but the gates had already been chained shut. Heavy locks clanged into place. The way out was gone. And then the shadows moved. Drawn by the song, by the sacrifice, the shapes from the tunnel surged forward, flowing around the cultists like smoke around a flame. They did not strike the robed figures. They embraced them, coiled around them, whispered into their ears, and the cultists laughed. One of them, a boy no older than 15, his cheeks still soft with youth, tore open his shirt to reveal a chest carved with runes. As the shadows wrapped around him, his body convulsed, bones stretching, flesh splitting. In moments, he stood twice his size, his mouth a gaping wound, filled with rows of teeth that had never belonged to any man. The guards who remained fought desperately. Shots cracked in the air, last bolts burning holes into the dark. A few cultists fell, screaming, their bodies twisting as though they were being dragged into the floor. But for each one slain, 2 more rose, their flesh puppeted by something that was not their own. One priest tried to rally the survivors. He climbed atop a broken crate, lifting the Aquila high, shouting, "Do not falter. The Emperor is with us." But the cultists turned as one, their blank eyes fixed on him. Their voices joined in a single, bone-deep note that rattled the station walls. The priest froze, his body stiffening, his arms locked in place. Blood poured from his mouth and nose, dripping down his robes, until his chest split open like wet parchment and something inside him clawed its way free. The Aquila fell, clattering to the ground. The people saw, and whatever hope had remained broke in an instant. Amid the horror, some clung still to reason. Families clustered in corners, clutching one another, whispering prayers. Workers tried to use their tools as weapons. A few guards formed a desperate line near the tracks, their rifles glowing red-hot from constant fire. But the cultists pressed harder, forcing them back. The shadows thickened. The song grew louder until it was all anyone could hear. And in the deepest part of the tunnel, something stirred. A new sound, deeper than the rest, rolled forward like the beating of a massive heart. The rails trembled, the stone walls groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling as the station shook with every pulse. The woman with the blank face raised her hands again. "The offering is ready," she whispered, though her voice carried through every ear, every bone. "The gates have been opened. The dark will walk among you," and in that moment the survivors realized the truth. The train was coming, but it would not carry them away. It would bring something else in. The station shook like a dying beast. The rails glowed red, and from the tunnel came a light too jagged to belong to any Imperial engine. People cheered at first, desperate to believe it was salvation. But when the train emerged, hope died. It was no machine of the Emperor. Its body was fused metal and bone, windows gaping like mouths, an engine shaped as a burning skull. Sparks flew like blood as it screeched to a stop. The cultists knelt in ecstasy. The guards fired uselessly. The survivors pounded at locked gates, screaming to be freed. The doors opened. From within stepped a giant, black armor trimmed in brass, eyes burning red. A Chaos Space Marine. His voice rumbled through the station. "You are free." Then he cut them down. One swing of his blade split crowds apart. Lasfire scattered off his armor. Men and women were torn in half, children crushed beneath his boots. The platform became a slaughterhouse, while behind him, more shapes stirred in the nightmare train. The cultists sang louder, calling it glory. For everyone else, it was the end. Amid the massacre, Guard Captain Valan stood his ground. "To the train," he bellowed. "Move or die." The words struck like fire. Survivors surged forward, trampling cultists as they threw themselves into the train's cars. Its walls pulsed like flesh. Windows showed only swirling void, but it was shelter. It was escape. Valan forced the controls. The machine shrieked, and with a lurch, the train roared down the rails. Behind them, the Marines' slaughter vanished into shadow. Inside, fear only deepened. The leather seats twitched. Veins pulsed in the walls. Faces whispered from the dark. Families clutched one another, trying to believe survival was still possible. Then came the singing. From the rear of the train, voices rose again, cultists, hidden among the evacuees, bleeding into the floor. Knives flashed, screams returned, and Valan lifted his rifle once more. They had escaped the station, but not the horror. The train rattled through the tunnels, metal screaming as if alive. Inside, silence pressed heavy, broken only by sobs and whispers. Then, movement. A man staggered down the aisle, clutching his chest. At first, they thought he was wounded. Then his skin split open. Black worms spilled out, writhing across the floor. His scream became a laugh. Panic erupted. Families scrambled over seats, trampling each other. The walls throbbed, faces stretched from the leather seats, mouths silently opening. Captain Valen and 2 guardsmen opened fire, the lasbolts burning through flesh and parasite alike. The smell of rot filled the car. Still, more cultists revealed themselves, knives glinting, chanting in languages no human throat should know. The survivors fought with bare hands, teeth, and fury. A mother strangled a cultist with her shawl, screaming prayers through her tears. Children hid beneath twitching benches. The train itself seemed to laugh, echoing with the sound of things not aboard. No one could tell what was enemy, what was madness, and what was the train itself. The shrieking grew louder ahead, stone grinding, supports breaking. A wave of dust swallowed the tracks. The last of the hive's tunnels were coming down. Valen forced his way to the control chamber. The train's engine was a living heart, glowing, beating. He pressed his hands against it, and the thing screamed, but the train lurched forward faster, plunging into the collapsing dark. Behind them, entire stations caved in. Great arches fell, crushing hundreds who never reached the platform. The roar of falling stone chased them like thunder. The survivors braced, some praying, some silent. The rails bent and split, sparks flying like comets. Still, the train tore forward, barely outrunning death. Then, impact. The collapse caught the rear cars, crushing them like tin. Screams were cut short. Half the survivors vanished in a single heartbeat. When the dust settled, the train still moved, but with fewer souls aboard, and the tunnels behind sealed forever. They had escaped the city. But into what? The train burst from the tunnels into open night. For a moment, silence held. The stars glimmered above, vast and cold. But the sky was wrong. The constellations shifted, twisting like worms. The moon split, revealing a red eye that watched them all. Gasps filled the car. Some wept in relief at breathing open air again. Others understood at once. This was no escape. They had left the hive, but not the nightmare. The train slowed, groaning as if wounded. Captain Valen stumbled forward, his body bruised and cut, his eyes hollow. He looked at the heart engine, pulsing weakly. It had carried them this far, but not without a price. The whispers began. The cultists were dead, but their words lingered, seeping from the walls, dripping into minds. Freedom lies ahead. Cast off the Emperor. Embrace the gods who saved you. Some civilians clung to the voices. A man knelt, pressing his forehead to the twitching floor. They spared us. We owe them, others recoiled, clutching the Aquilus around their necks, praying desperately to a distant emperor who might never hear. Valen knew the choice. Destroy the train here, end it, and scatter into the wasteland, doomed but still human. Or keep riding deeper into this corrupted night, surrendering to a salvation born of damnation. He raised his rifle, pointing it at the living engine. His hands shook. Survivors screamed both for and against him. The train itself seemed to shudder in laughter. The rifle cracked. The last bolt struck the living engine square in its heart. The train screamed metal, bone, and soul all at once. It lurched from the rails, sparks flying like falling stars, and the survivors were thrown to the floor. Windows shattered, wind howled, and the great machine tore itself apart. When the dust settled, silence fell. They were no longer in the city nor in the tunnels. They lay scattered in a wasteland of black rock beneath a sky that bled. The train's twisted carcass smoldered behind them, its heart split open and oozing. A few dozen survivors crawled free. Children cried. Mothers held them close. The air tasted of ash and iron, but it was still air. Captain Valen stood, his rifle cracked, his eyes hollow. He looked across the horizon. No hive, no stars he knew, no sign of the Imperium. Only endless red plains, and in the distance, colossal shadows moving against the sky. Too large, too wrong to name. Someone whispered, "Where are we?" No one answered. Valen knew only this. They were alive, but not saved. The Emperor had not claimed them. Chaos had not claimed them fully either. They were something in between, and in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no middle ground that lasts. The survivors began walking, each step into a world not meant for mankind. Behind them, the wreckage of the last train still hissed, still twitched, as if laughing that they believed themselves free. The wasteland swallowed their voices, and the galaxy moved on,